Good evening, you're watching London Live News at 6 with Helena Warrior. Coming up tonight, a number of Met Police cases involving strip searches of children have been referred to the police watchdog as public concern over the impact of these searches on young people grows. As the capital and beyond prepare for another day of rail strikes tomorrow, London Underground workers vote for further industrial action in a dispute over jobs, pay and pensions. We'll have an update on London's weather in the next 10 minutes, plus a touch of London in Glastonbury as the iconic festival kicks off. West London's own Notting Hill Carnival Parade performs a vibrant procession at Worthy Farm. And has one of your social media posts ever been taken down by an algorithm? A new exhibition showing the work cancelled by AI comes to the capital. First tonight, though, the Met has referred itself to the police watchdog after it identified 8 more cases of children being strip-searched by its officers. It comes after the case of Child Q, a 15-year-old black girl who was strip-searched at a school in East London by Met police officers after she was wrongly suspected of carrying cannabis. The new voluntary referrals relate to separate incidents between December 2019 and March 2022, where children aged 14 to 17 were strip-searched by officers in custody. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Lawrence Taylor said the Met understands the trauma and lasting impact these type of searches can have on young people, adding that the Met had already made a number of changes so that officers consider the child first and take a safeguarding approach. Well, 3 cases, including that of Child Q, had already been referred to the watchdog. London Underground workers have reaffirmed their backing for industrial action in a dispute over jobs, pay, pensions and conditions. Members of the RMT union have gone ahead with 4 strikes in 3 months, including a 24-hour walkout on Tuesday. By law, the RMT had to reballot its members, with the union saying there was a decisive result in favour of industrial action. Well, no new strike dates have been set. TfL's Chief Operating Officer said they are disappointed in the result, as RMT's General Secretary Mike Lynch said the union are acutely aware of the funding cuts on Transport for London by the government, and TfL and the Mayor of London need to seriously rethink their plans for hundreds of job cuts. Well, it comes as another day of rail strikes are set for tomorrow in London and across England, Wales and Scotland. Hopes for an agreement between the RMT union and the government to avoid walkouts this weekend have faded, with advice given to avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. Well, union bosses have warned more strikes are likely if a settlement over jobs cannot be reached, while the government has said the strikes are an unnecessary response to needed reform of the rail network. A man who was arrested after the death of a mother and son in North London has been released with no further action. Police and paramedics found 37-year-old Yi Chen and her 5-year-old son Xing Duan Yun with stab wounds at an address in Brookside South in Barnet on Tuesday. Well, Scotland Yard said a post-mortem examination had provided important new information and nobody else is sought in connection with the 2 deaths. The Met Police has launched an appeal to find a possible witness following the rape of a teenage girl in North London. The victim was assaulted on March 7th after she left a block of flats in Joyce Avenue in Edmonton just before 9 p.m. Well, police were called to 4 Street, where a woman who identified herself as Sandra spoke to the victim and comforted her. The woman then left the area when the police arrived on the 149 bus heading towards London Bridge. Well, she's described as a black female of medium build, wearing a black coat, long red skirt and carrying a plastic bag. And police say her evidence could be crucial. Data has shown that thousands of children across England, and particularly in London, are not fully protected against polio. According to the UK Health Service Agency, the West London borough of Hillingdon has the lowest polio vaccine rates among 13 and 14-year-olds across the UK. An uptake of the so-called polio school leaver booster vaccine among Year 9s was below 50% in 6 London boroughs. Well, it comes after an alert was issued on Wednesday following the detection of poliovirus in sewage samples here in the capital. Well, on to some news from the world of arts now, and prices for top tickets to see West End shows have risen by 21% since before the pandemic. That's according to research by the theatre publication The Stage. The average top ticket price is currently £140.85, up from around £116 in mid-2019. Well, research also showed that the lowest price tickets have risen by 3.3% since 2019. That's up to £22.56. The most expensive show in the survey is Cabaret at the Playhouse, for which some tickets could set you back just over £300. Now, the Wimbledon Foundation has held a special tennis-themed afternoon tea to welcome Ukrainian refugees who have recently settled in the area. With help from the local Merton-based charity, the Polish Family Association, around 100 people were invited to get a taste of British culture to help introduce them to their new home.
It's really focused on welcoming the Ukrainian refugees that have arrived in the borough, and also to celebrate the incredible work of the volunteers who've been, responding amazingly over the last couple of months. We have 500 tickets that we'll be handing out to refugees, host families and volunteers so they can come and join us on Middle Sunday for our centenary celebration.
I mean, you need to understand that they left the countries with nothing. They flee the war. They don't know if they've got anything to go back to. They don't know if the family is still alive. So, going through that kind of traumas, it's an awful experience. And seeing them now overcoming those issues and trying to fit in, it's amazing. You can see the progress they made.
Merton is home to hundreds of Ukrainian refugees, and we're really, really proud of the work that our residents have put into welcoming them here, and that organisations like the Polish Family Association have put into supporting them in their integration. And AELTC, who run the Wimbledon tennis tournament, have really kindly offered lots of tickets to an event at Wimbledon Tennis next week, and they wanted to give them to Ukrainian refugees and their hosts, which is brilliant. So we, as Merton Council, have supported this event today to invite lots of members of the Ukrainian community to have an afternoon tea with us, a very Wimbledon-themed afternoon tea, and receive their tickets.
Well, the event itself is kicking off on Monday, and Wimbledon bosses have hailed the return of the buzz to SW19 as final preparations were underway for their first full-capacity championships since the pandemic. COVID saw the tennis championships cancelled in 2020, and last year the All England club took the decision to limit the crowd numbers. Well, this year spectators are allowed to attend in full force, including the return of the famous queue. Now, Glastonbury festival goers have said a festival-first Notting Hill Carnival parade perfectly sums up the event. Caribbean dancers in bikinis and feather headdresses marched through the site at Worthy Farm after a new partnership between the annual street party in Notting Hill and the Somerset Festival was announced this year. The carnival showpiece is based at Block 9, which is the late-night party zone of Glastonbury, and began their vibrant procession there before meandering through the roads that link Glastonbury's stages. Well, Billie Eilish is set to make history when she takes to the Pyramid stage this evening as Glastonbury Festival's youngest ever solo headliner. The Grammy-winning singer, who is 20, will perform alongside her brother and co-writer Phineas O'Connell. And for some music here in the capital, Sir Elton John will bring his career-spanning farewell tour to BST Hyde Park today as the festival opens with a sellout performance. The chart topper, well known for his hits including Candle in the Wind, Rocket Man and I'm Still Standing, is the first in a run of headliners due to grace crowds over the next 3 weekends. Well, his performance comes partway through his marathon Farewell Yellow Brick Road tour, due to conclude next year, marking his retirement from touring after more than half a century. Well, let's see how the weather is looking for all of these outdoor events then. A small chance of thunder this evening, but it should pass quickly before a cloudy night with lows of around 15 degrees. Looking to the weekend, it's a pleasant couple of days in the low 20s. Tomorrow, mostly cloudy throughout the day before heading into Sunday, where you can expect some sunshine trying to peek through the clouds to round off the weekend. Right, it's time for a break now, but when we come back, to mark Women in Engineering Day, we'll speak to the engineer working on Crossrail, encouraging more women to get into the sector.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to London Live News. Now it's time to take a look at the world of politics in the week in Westminster with John Johnston from Politics Home. John, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with something that has affected every Londoner and beyond that, the rail strikes. Just run us through who is striking and why they're happening.
Yeah, we've had these rail strikes, the biggest in kind of 3 decades, and at the moment doesn't seem like we're any closer to really having any resolution. So the strikes have gone ahead over pay as one of the elements and conditions and some kind of forced redundancies that are being looked at as the other kind of second big thing. Obviously, there's been negotiations happening between the RMT and the government, but they really seem to be at loggerheads, and the language around the strikes has been quite inflammatory. It really doesn't look like the government are willing to budge much at all.
So I think you mentioned the language there, and there is this kind of idea that the strikes are purely about pay, but they're not, are they? As you mentioned, they're about job cuts and the move to online ticketing.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of train companies are looking, as we come out of COVID, of ways of changing the way that they work. Some of the roles that they're looking at cutting are, as you mentioned, around ticketing and closing ticketing offices because it's claimed that they're just really not being used very much. And then there's also some other roles as well that are kind of maybe more safety focused and would rely or require some of the workers who are being kept to do longer hours. So it's kind of the whole package, really. And, it's, as you said, not just about pay, which makes the negotiations a little bit more complicated. But we're not really even at the stage where we're having kind of preliminary discussions about trying to resolve it.
Well, what do you think the outcome is going to be? What do you expect it to be? As you said, it doesn't really sound like the government and the RMT union are any closer to reaching a deal.
No, they're not. And, I think we could expect for further strikes to go ahead. The RMT have certainly indicated that. But we're also seeing strikes or proposed strike action in other industries, in other areas. We've got criminal barristers looking at going on strike. We've got some staff, British Airways staff, looking at going on strike over the summer holidays. Teachers are talking about striking. NHS staff are talking about striking. There's very clearly big issues at the moment. A lot of these things are around pay, and a lot of it is because the pay rises that are being proposed are well below inflation because inflation has gone through the roof. So it's a really, really kind of tough-looking summer ahead for all different kinds of industries who are having to at least think about strikes because they're just not able to bridge the gaps that are currently there.
Absolutely. Well, moving on, another significant event for Westminster this week is the 2 by-elections. Just tell us where they took place and what happened. Pretty fresh right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had these 2 by-elections, Conservative seats or former Conservative seats, one in Wakefield and one in Tiverton. Both kind of lost now. One went to Labour, the other one went to the Lib Dems. I think there was a bit of an expectation that would happen. Certainly Wakefield looked solid for Labour, but I think the kind of big deal that's happened is the extent to which these seats have shifted. The Tory vote just evaporated. So a really, really bad set of results for Boris Johnson and the government. And then to follow up on that, Oliver Dowden, the chairman of the party, he resigned just hours after the results came in, not really specifically targeting Boris Johnson, but the subtext was certainly there that the party are not happy with the way things are being run and, looking at what can be changed.
Well, you mentioned the Prime Minister Boris Johnson there. Will this have any effect on him? Has he commented on the by-elections?
Yeah, I mean, he's in Rwanda at the moment on a trip. Always a dangerous time, really, for a leader to go away. Oftentimes it's when they're abroad that, things back home start to get pretty bad. I think he was quite shocked at Oliver Dowden's resignation. It wasn't something that seemed to be expected. At the moment, I think they'll be hoping that no more cabinet ministers resign because that would be obviously a huge blow to his authority. But at the moment, it seems like he's planning to tough it out, saying that he's going to keep going. Obviously, we had the no confidence vote, which he won just a few weeks ago, and now it's limited in terms of how they can do that again quickly. So his position is not great, but it's going to take quite an effort to kind of unseat him.
Absolutely. Well, John Johnson, thank you so much for joining us here on London Live News for the roundup of the week in Westminster. Lots going on there. Now, to mark Women in Engineering Day, London Live has been speaking to one of the female engineers involved in the Crossrail project, speaking about how she got involved in the industry and what it's been like working on such a huge job. She said more and more women are taking up a career in the sector. Well, Tanya also asked her how she's encouraging the younger generation to get involved.
For people kind of my age or people maybe a bit younger, more starting out in their careers, there is a much more equal balance between men and women. But then when you look at the more senior levels and people that are maybe more experienced and been there for years, I'd say that's when you can notice it's much more male dominated and you don't see as many women high up there.
And what do you think are some of the barriers that are sort of stopping women being able to get to those positions?
I don't think there's necessarily barriers stopping women getting to those positions now, but I think maybe in the past there hasn't been as much, women haven't known about the opportunities as much, I don't think. Even when I was in school, and that wasn't too long ago, we weren't really told about what engineering is or that women can do it. So I think in the past it was probably even more like that. It's definitely changing now. So hopefully that's something that will change in the future. And as the years go by, we will see those women in higher positions.
Yeah, we've all done that test when we were at school where it sort of tells you what you could be good at according to your interests, whether you're going to be a gardener or, a lawyer. And, you were saying there isn't really that much information, or at least there wasn't when you were studying. Do you think that has now changed? Do you think it's becoming more accessible?
Yeah, I think for sure it is changing, and it's something that's being pushed a lot more in schools now. And school children are shown what options are out there. I guess I've kind of been part of that myself, because when I started my career as an engineer, I became a STEM ambassador. So basically that just involves like going into schools and showing what engineering is, what it's like being a woman in engineering, what I do. And I think that kind of thing gives younger kids the visibility of what's actually possible. That's something that I didn't really have so much growing up.
And when you think about your sort of day-to-day, for someone who perhaps doesn't know what engineering is, I guess there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to engineering. There's going to be lots of different options of how you can work in the industry. But what does that look like for you?
So my specific job is I work on the project which has delivered the signalling system on the Elizabeth line. So we have a system which is on board the trains and also a system in the control centre. They work together so that the trains have what's called automatic operation, which basically means they can kind of drive themselves. They still have a driver, obviously. But yeah, that's the system that I work on.
And what was it like being a part of the Elizabeth Line project? I mean, that's a pretty big job. That's one to put on the CV, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Like really, really exciting. I first started working on the project when I was a graduate. I think 2.5 years ago, I started on the project. And when I got the opportunity to do that, I was like, yeah, wow, that's a great opportunity to work on something so big. And then I enjoyed it so much, so I've stayed there ever since. Now that it's open, it's just amazing to see like all the hard work that we've put in. Myself, my colleagues, some of my colleagues have worked on the project for over 10 years, and it's just amazing to see it finally in real life open now.
Yeah, incredible to be a part of something that is a huge part of British history. Obviously a lot of hard work and hours, years went into this, and it must have been frustrating with there being so many delays and issues along the way. If you and your wider team were sort of to look back at it, what went wrong and what did you learn from it? What would you do differently?
I don't know about my project specifically, and I've only worked there for 2.5 years, so I guess there's a lot of external factors that have came into play, but personally, I'm not sure about delays or anything like that.
Have you got any sort of interesting or unusual facts about the Elizabeth line that perhaps aren't common knowledge?
I mean, I guess there's so many things, but so many like complex technical things that would probably bore a lot of people that are not interested in trains. But I guess what a lot of people don't know about the signalling system is that the trains drive themselves.
There we are. You're watching London Live News with Helena Wardier. A reminder of our top story coming up after the break. Plus, an online pride extravaganza. We'll be speaking to the Twitch streamer Laura Blake about her new show, interviewing queer changemakers and celebrating the LGBT plus community this Pride Month. See you soon.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to London Live News. A reminder of our main story this evening. The Met has referred itself to the police watchdog after it identified 8 more cases of children being strip searched by its officers. It comes after the case of Child Q, a 15-year-old black girl who was strip searched at a school in East London by Met police officers after she was wrongly suspected of carrying cannabis. The new voluntary referrals relate to separate incidents between December 2019 and March this year, where children aged 14 to 17 were strip searched by officers in custody. Well, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Lawrence Taylor said the Met understands the trauma and lasting impact these type of searches can have on young people, adding that the Met had already made a number of changes so that officers consider the child first and take a safeguarding approach. Well, 3 cases, including that of Child Q, had already been referred to the watchdog. Now, as we near the end of Pride Month, one comedian and presenter has been streaming online on Twitch in her new show, The Pride Guide. Laura Blake has been celebrating the positive news in the LGBT plus community, interviewing queer changemakers and iconic allies to entertain and educate her audiences. Well, she joined me earlier in the studio to talk about the show and what life is like as a trans person here in the capital.
I'm from East London, which turns out is a core part of me. Not only do I consider myself a Hackney girl, but growing up here in the most multicultural city on earth, you learn about other cultures and how to be accepting of things you didn't grow up with. And I think it's a place I feel that I can most be myself.
There's a lovely bit of London love there. You said it's a place that makes you feel like you can be most yourself. Just tell us a bit more about your relationship with London.
I mean, well, I grew up in Hackney. I've lived here all my life. And there was not a place like it. The first ever joke I wrote was, I feel like a Londoner trapped in a New Yorker's body. You could say I'm transatlantic, which is a great joke. But I really feel like if you grow up here, you just love London. It's so diverse, so many different cultures, so many different languages, so many different walks of life around you. It's not boring.
Yeah, definitely not boring. And we will talk a bit more about London later. But first, I want to talk about the fact, obviously, it's June, it's Pride Month, and I want to talk about your show. This year, you're streaming on Twitch with a show all about the LGBT plus community. Just tell us about the show, what happens on it.
Yeah, so we've got Twitch for some reason, trusted me on their front page. So if you go to twitch.tv if you live in the UK, I am on the front page, right up centre. There's only one auto-playing video, and it'll be me between 7 and 9. And the Pride Guide celebrates Twitch's LGBTQIA streamers, so we uplift voices that aren't heard. We talk about news and talk about things that are happening with Pride, and talk to some celebrities and allies.
Absolutely. Well, you have had some fantastic guests on the show so far, including the wonderful artist and presenter Fleur East, who's also an East Londoner. Let's just take a little look at a clip of Fleur on your show.
Like, do you have advice for people that are scared to be allies and scared to, like, just take the leap and go, actually, let's try to drive some social change?
I think you just have to speak about it from from your point of view, an authentic place. So, for example, I feel like people, like you said, people put a lot of pressure on themselves, and they feel like if they're going to talk about an issue, they need to know everything. They need to be well-versed. They need to have all of the dates throughout history and know all the public figures that are, you know, monumental for the movement. You don't have to know all those things. If you're on your platform and you don't know, go on your platform and talk about how you don't know.
That's some pretty good advice from Fleur there. Why is it important to talk to allies as well as members of the LGBT plus community?
Well, because Pride can be great. It can be a party. It can be a celebration. I mean, we see like Britney Spears headlining Brighton Pride, and we see big names. But actually, it's a protest. This is the 50th anniversary of Pride in London, and it's really important to remind not just queer people but allies. But actually, we're still fighting for rights. We're still fighting for the right. I can't leave the house at the moment without getting abused daily. You'll have couples nudging each other, or you'll have out and out people just shouting abuse from their vehicles. And it's really important to know that the reason we have a Pride Month is to really shout quite loudly about these issues. Yeah, we can celebrate people being themselves and people being free to be themselves, but it's really important that not only queer people, but all people speak up for marginalised groups in society.
Absolutely. And of course, as you said, Pride Month, it's a great celebration, but it is also important to focus on those very real issues affecting the community today. And, you know, we did talk earlier about London being such a great multicultural city, and it is probably one of the safest cities for transgender people. But as you just mentioned, it's not always totally safe, is it?
No, I mean, I grew up in Hackney, I still live in Hackney. I live in hipster central, and Hackney is probably one of the most accepting queer-friendly boroughs in London, I would say, in my opinion. But still, you get abuse because I think, well, as a trans person especially, it's a massive taboo. Trans people have got 1% of the population. So a lot of people just haven't met a trans person yet. And it's kind of like, oh, well, if you listen to most mainstream media, it's like, we should be really scared of you because of X, Y, and Z. And actually, I just want to go to Tesco and buy a meal deal. Leave me alone.
We saw there Fleur talking about being an ally, and you have had some very glam guests on your show, but you've also done some pretty emotional and hard-hitting interviews. You spoke, I think, absolutely amazingly to Ukrainian pride. Let's just take a little look at that first, and then we'll chat about it.
We talk about privilege a lot, and we talk about passing privilege for trans people. We talk about pretty privilege. Geographic privilege is huge. And I don't know. And the video, as evocative emotionally as it is, I still, my heart will be with queer Ukrainians.
That's a very important message about privilege there. What did you learn from speaking to Ukrainian Bride?
So much. There are people that being a Londoner, I'm so privileged to have been born in such a wonderful city. I would say the greatest in the world. And for them, all of their community, as a trans person, but as any kind of queer person, having your community to support you while you face bigotry every day is so important, to have those friends and have that community around you. And then to be forced to either fight a war or to escape and flee and be dispersed from your community is horrible. And actually, we kind of see that with our government at the moment, kind of like with Rwanda. It's like, actually gay people aren't allowed there, but we're really worried about, we're not asking those people, well, are they queer at all? Are they safe where they're going? And it's really important, and actually it's really scary thinking about Ukraine Pride. And obviously they're not going to have a celebration this year. They're not going to have a protest this year. They've released a almost 3-minute video and that's it. And it's so evocative, it's so emotional. I've watched it 3 times and I've cried all 3 times because it's horrible.
There we go, that was Laura Blake, and you can watch the Pride Guide on Monday from 7 to 9 p.m. and her show, The Laura Blake Show, every weekday morning at 9:30 a.m, all on Twitch. Time for a final break now, but coming up, the Serpentine Summer Exhibition is back in West London this year with a project responding to climate crisis.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to the final part of London Live News. Some arts now, and we're talking censorship. A new online and in-person exhibition is taking a look at artists and brands who've had their creative work or ads banned on social media. The Unseen takes a look at algorithms on sites like YouTube and Instagram that are taking down work without any human consultation into its context. Well, it's the idea of the artist David Rankin, who wants to uncancel the pieces and put them back on display for the public. Well, he spoke with James, and just a warning, there are some flashing images.
In the piece, I'm going to have to edit out any potentially explicit content. We're a pre-watershed programme. What do you make of the fact that I'll be having to do that the full works can't even be realised, you know, whilst we're talking about it now?
Obviously, there are rules specifically there, but I mean, this isn't where you're blurring it out on social media. They're just closing people's acts down. They're taking them off. They're banning them, and they, you know, some of them get lifetime bans, and it's very difficult for them to get back up on the platforms again. As I said, everybody I would say 90% of the community love the platforms. They want to be on them. They would much prefer blurring than they would being, you know, completely cut off. And when that's cancelling through algorithm. What we're trying to do is offer a voice to some of the people that have been unfairly censored by social media platforms, and create a community to create debate around it. We don't want to point fingers at platforms. In fact, most of the contributors and most of the community love the platforms. They absolutely adore them. Their businesses are on them. They want to be on them, but the artificial intelligence and algorithms unfortunately censor them. And when they censor them, it really impedes their ability to reach their audience.
Okay, well, give us a few examples of the kind of thing then that will be in this that really highlight what you're saying.
Yeah, one of my favorites is Carney, who set up a community called iMama during lockdown. And iMama was a community about taking photographs of your children, of what it was like to be a mother during that period. And her work has been, and photographers on that platform have, and part of that community have been censored again and again and again. And really, it's one of those strangely emotive subjects that you can't imagine it being something that people would censor. But the way that the algorithms work is they're one size fits all. And the real problem with it is there's no recourse. So when you complain to any of the platforms, it's again artificial intelligence that are answering you. So there's no one you can speak to. So if you put it up on YouTube or Instagram, they say you haven't got the rights for this, even though you directed it. And then when you go to try and get it sorted out, it's literally like talking to the worst counsel about your drains you've ever talked to. You know, you can't get through to them. They won't respond to you. And when they do respond to you, which takes ages, it's normally a kind of, you know, one of those letters that they send to everybody. So it's really just trying to get, you know, people talking about this stuff and having a discussion about it, not to, you know, really chastise or implicate anybody in particular, just to say, let's put some people in this system. You know, you're making lots and lots of money out of the product that a lot of these people are producing. Let's put some people in the middle so that they can have some way of being able to speak to somebody to talk about what their problems are.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is when you read a short blurb of what this is all about, you assume this is about cancel culture and people that have perhaps been no-platformed for historic things they've said, when in actual fact, they're going to see something very different. It's all about expression and how, as you say, algorithms have taken them off these platforms that give them work. What do you kind of make of that? Anyone that will be coming and saying, oh, well, this is just a very woke version of what I thought it was.
People are always going to assume that when people are talking about censorship, it's around stuff that is extreme. And actually, this isn't censorship that's equitable. You know, I'm all for censorship of especially social media platforms where you have children looking at the platforms. That I'm all for censorship that's for the right reason. And I think that because it's always this knee-jerk reaction to things like this, that people will have a different view of it. But if you go to the website or go to the Qantas Gallery where it's showing till the 29th of June, what you'll see is people that have created some amazing work that is actually much, much more emotionally driven or educationally driven or just about art and creativity than it is about, you know, something that should be banned.
We say you're all for censorship in the right conditions, as it were, but in art, do you think there should be any kind of censorship? Film, television, music, you know, works of art. Do you think anyone should have the right to quell artistic expression?
That's a really interesting question. I think somebody said to me the other day, who's a very smart guy in insights and strategy, and he came to do a talk about the trends in society. And he said that we're one of the most puritanical societies, you know, of the last 150 years. And I don't necessarily think that is coming from the audience. I think it's actually coming from the platforms. The more puritanical and the more echo chamber they are and the more extreme, the more they divide people, the more they allow people to have their own small, tight-knit communities that don't actually have any discussion or debate, the more these types of things become a problem. And that means that some censorship, is inequitable and some censorship is right. But in the past, we've had rules, we've gone through the advent of radio and print and TV, and they've all been able to create rules and regulations around it. And this is what's needed on these platforms. We need discussion. What happens with the platforms, and one of the worst things about it is it's all behind closed doors. So, you don't have any recourse for discussion or debate. And what happens without discussion and debate is you create a puritanical culture. And that's what I think the platforms are unfortunately doing.
Well, that exhibition is on now at the Digital First Qantas Gallery in Shoreditch and online at the unseen.site. Now, an exhibition responding to the climate crisis is now on show at the Serpentine. Back to Earth is the Serpentine North Summer Exhibition, and it's on until mid-September. And this time it will reflect on how we can learn from diverse experiences to create change. Well, we spoke to those involved in the project.
The theme of this exhibition, along with the wider Back to Earth project, is really what can artists do, what can they say, what can they inspire us to think about, and what can they draw our attention to in the face of the climate crisis. The art that's included in the exhibition really represents a wide variety of perspectives and many different kinds of materials and practices. And it ranges from the beautiful wallpaper that I'm standing in front of, which is running all the way around the exterior of the gallery. It's a composite of satellite imagery that's been put together by the artist Carolina Caicedo. And it shows a series of waterways in South and North America, which have variously been dammed and or in the process of being undammed. And you can really see the differences in the surrounding ecology, which is visible through the different colorways, but actually felt in the human communities there that often lose their connection to the land by these massive interventions. It's a very sensory experience coming to this exhibition because some are invisible in the work of smell researcher and artist Cecil Toulas, and her positioning of certain smells throughout the space are intended to trigger emotive responses, different kinds of focus. They respond to the themes of the exhibition, and they offer the possibility of actually visiting a different exhibition every time because they're appearing at different times of day. There are other smells in the space as well through a temple, a drying temple called Ikum by Tabitha Rezair and Yusuf Akbar Ola. What's been chosen by Tabitha and Yusuf is a combination of herbs and flowers that have medicinal purposes, specifically for women's health. Tabitha also works as a doula, and for aromatherapy. And an earth and clay installation with sound, which is a collaboration between artist Dineo Seshibo Pape and the sound artist and animist Katitaya Katitu Tayasu. All of the artists that we have invited have thought about materiality. They've worked with us very closely to think about the potential impacts of those materials. So a lot of the work that you will encounter here was made locally using local materials. We've recycled materials from previous exhibitions, or that they will have an afterlife in a different place. What I would hope for from people that experience the exhibition, or even any part of the Back to Earth project, is a space in which to learn, to respond, to really have a sort of physical and emotional response as well, and to recognize that, because we all know that climate change is happening, we all know that we have a responsibility towards it, but it's very difficult to feel that we can take control of that response. It is increasingly part of everyone's practice, everyone's daily life, that we think about these questions and that we are taking responsibility for them. So although there is a long, let's say, lead-in to us being able to present something like this to the public, we really feel that this is something that will need to continue, not just for our institution, but for all institutions and culture at large. People should come and visit if they have a particular interest in ecology, in the climate crisis, but also if they would like to experience an exhibition that offers them many different kinds of experience, whether that's a very relaxing sonic experience. There's many different sounds, there's very beautiful smells, both inside the exhibition and outside in the park. You don't even have to come into the gallery to experience the exhibition. You could visit Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg's garden that we've planted in Kensington Gardens. Or you could come and visit our restaurant and still experience a way of thinking about the climate crisis through food choices.
Back to Earth Live is an incredible 3-month and more live program that includes performance, film, screenings, talks, conversations, workshops. First up is Sun and Sea, the award-winning opera performance at the Venice Biennale in 2019, where you get to have an experience of a beach with beachgoers singing about climate change. That's in Lewisham, beginning tomorrow until the 10th of July. We have symposia that are coming up at the Serpentine on climate justice on the 9th of July, Queer Earth and Liquid Matters on the 16th and 17th of July in Soho at Stone Nest. We have performances coming up in the Serpentine Pavilion in September by Himali Singh Soin and Bonestan Jones, and we have Daisy Ginsburg speaking about the Pollinator Pathmaker Garden, and of course the return of the Serpentine Marathon in Earth Day 2023. I think that artists and thinkers and creative practitioners who have dedicated their practice to contributing to the environmental effort deserve a seat at the table when we have conversations about figuring out how to move forward in the current state of things. We always think about images of apocalypse when we think about the future, but it's important to allow these thinkers and artists and to help us reimagine different scenarios of what our world will look like in 50 years, 500 years, or 5,000 years from now.
Well, that's on at the Serpentine until the 18th of September. Well, just before we leave, let's take another look at the weather for you. There's a small chance of thunder this evening, but it should pass quickly before a cloudy night with lows of around 15 degrees. Looking to the weekend, and it's a pleasant couple of days in the low 20s. Tomorrow, mostly cloudy throughout the day before heading into Sunday, where you can expect some sunshine trying to peek through the clouds to round off the weekend. Well, that's all from us this evening, and we'll be back in the morning with London's Weekend, a look back of some of the main talking points from across the capital this week. You can also keep up to date by following us on social media at London Live. Have a great weekend.